Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. How have you been lately? I hope today has been gentle with you. If you're looking for a little warmth and a story that speaks to the heart, you're in just the right place. Let's step into a journey that begins with something as simple as a glass of champagne, a chance encounter between a grounded woman and a man who has everything except peace in his heart. Soft music played in the grand reception hall, where crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Emma Carter stood near the bar, a small clutch in hand, her eyes scanning the room as she patiently waited for a glass of champagne. She wasn't used to places like this: luxurious weddings, designer dresses, and conversations filled with polite pretense. But Lily, today's bride, was her best friend, and for Lily, Emma was willing to endure a long evening. Her gaze flicked toward the bar just in time to see the bartender place the last glass of champagne on the counter. Emma stepped forward, only to watch a man's hand swoop in and casually claim it right in front of her. She paused, momentarily stunned. "Seriously?" she said, eyes fixed on the man who had just swiped the drink. He turned, tall and perfectly put together. A hint of amusement played at the corners of his mouth. "Didn't see your name on it." His voice was low and smooth, but carried a trace of arrogance that instantly felt like a challenge. Emma crossed her arms, arching a brow. "I've been standing here for nearly 5 minutes. You just showed up and grabbed it like you're the guest of honor." He shrugged. Didn't realize weddings came with drink reservations. He took a sip, eyes glinting like he was enjoying himself far too much. Emma inhaled slowly. "Do you always take things that don't belong to you?" "Only when they're worth it," he replied, not missing a beat. Emma rolled her eyes. "Well, enjoy your champagne." "Wait," he held the glass out to her. "Take it. You fought for it. You deserve it." She took it, their fingers brushed just for a moment, but it was enough to send a strange spark through her. "Emma," she said simply, "and you are?" "Nathan," he replied with a grin. "Nice to meet you, even if it was a bit of a champagne brawl." Emma didn't quite know why she lingered after that bizarre champagne exchange. Maybe it was the glint in Nathan's eyes, or the way he smiled like nothing in the world was worth getting too serious about. Whatever the reason, she found herself still standing beside him as the music shifted and the bride and groom took to the floor for their first dance. Guests turned their attention toward the couple, forming a soft circle under the golden light. Emma glanced at Nathan and caught him watching the newlyweds with a distant look in his eyes. "Do you believe in love like that?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "Like what?" "Love where nothing else matters, where someone chooses you no matter what." Emma hesitated. "I want to believe in it, but," he tilted his head slightly, "but people have a habit of letting you down." Nathan didn't say anything, but his gaze stayed on her. Before she could speak again, a woman approached them, stunning in a designer gown, dripping in diamonds, as if she had walked straight out of a fashion editorial. "Nathan, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you," she said warmly, wrapping him in a hug. Emma blinked. "Your mom?" He smiled gently. "Yeah, hi, Mom." And suddenly everything clicked. The quiet confidence, the effortless elegance, the air of control. Nathan. Nathaniel Blake, billionaire investor. The man who'd graced the cover of magazines Emma had once edited. She nearly dropped her champagne. Nathan turned to her with a knowing smirk. "Something wrong?" Emma inhaled slowly. "Not at all." But inside, her thoughts spun. She had just spent 10 minutes bantering with one of the most powerful men in the country, and somehow he had seemed just like any other man. Until now, 3 days had passed since the wedding. 3 days since that strange encounter, and the name that still echoed in Emma's mind, Nathaniel Blake. She hadn't called, hadn't texted. She'd made it perfectly clear to herself. She wasn't the type to chase intrigue or play games with billionaires. But that didn't stop her thoughts from drifting back to the way he had looked at her, not with charm, not with flirtation, but with something quieter. Like he saw her. Really saw her. That afternoon, a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, her breath caught. Nathan stood there wearing a simple navy dress shirt and tailored slacks, looking both out of place and entirely at ease in the dim hallway of her modest apartment building. "How did you find me?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He leaned against the doorframe, unfazed. "You mentioned you work in publishing. Not many Emma Carters in that field." "That sounds dangerously close to stalking. I prefer to think of it as persistence," he said with a slight grin. She crossed her arms. "And why exactly are you being persistent?" His smile softened into something more genuine. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you." Her heart stuttered. Nathan watched her, unguarded, no games, just a man trying to understand what it was that had gotten under his skin. "I know this is unexpected," he continued, "but I wanted to see you again, and since you weren't calling me..." He raised an eyebrow. "You decided to show up?" she challenged. "It worked, didn't it?" he teased. Emma sighed, glanced down the hallway, then stepped back. "You might as well come in, before my neighbors think something scandalous is going on." Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books and plants, layered with the kind of lived-in charm money couldn't buy. Nathan stepped inside, glancing around slowly. "You are mad," he said. "I'm surprised," she admitted. "People like you don't usually come to places like this." His eyes darkened slightly. "People like me?" "People with everything. Money, power. No reason to chase anyone." Nathan stepped closer, gaze steady. "I'm not chasing just anyone. I'm chasing you." Emma wasn't entirely sure why she agreed. Maybe it was the honesty in Nathan's eyes, or the way he stood in her tiny apartment, entirely unguarded. Whatever the reason, an hour later she found herself in his car, headed somewhere he simply described as not what you're expecting. When they arrived, Emma paused. The restaurant had no flashy sign, just a sleek, modern building with a discreet entrance. Inside, the lighting was warm, the space quiet and elegant, and there were no menus. Just a personalized dining experience, crafted by the chef for each guest. "This place," she said as they were seated at a private table, "it's different." "I thought about taking you somewhere more traditional," Nathan said, pouring her wine, "but then I figured you'd see right through it." She raised a brow. "See through what, exactly?" "That I was trying to impress you." A small smile curved her lips. "So you admit it." "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. Emma wasn't used to men like this. Most tried too hard to appear indifferent or dominant, but Nathan, with all his power and confidence, was trying genuinely. "You don't need all of this," she said, gesturing around them. "I know," he replied, his voice softer now. "But I wanted you here." Dinner began, an array of artful, delicate dishes, each more exquisite than the last. Emma took a bite, then let out a quiet breath of appreciation. "This is annoyingly good," she admitted. Nathan laughed, really laughed, not the practiced kind, but something genuine. Then came the conversation, not the surface-level kind, but something real. He asked about her work, her dreams, what made her feel most alive, and when she turned the question back on him, he hesitated. "I have everything people think they want," he said, swirling his wine, "but sometimes it doesn't feel like enough." She studied him. "So, what's missing?" He looked up, his gaze locking with hers. No arrogance, no charm, just raw honesty. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I think I'm starting to figure it out." 2 days after the dinner, just as Emma was leaving her office, that now familiar car pulled up to the curb, Nathan leaning casually against it as if the entire city had no other destination but her. "Don't tell me you're showing up unannounced again," she said as she approached, half amused, half cautious. "This time I have a reason," Nathan replied, opening the car door for her. "Come with me, I want to show you something." Emma looked at him, then at the car. "Can I ask where we're going?" "You can," he smirked, "but I'm not promising I'll answer right away." Curiosity, mixed with that strange sense of safety she always felt around him, nudged her forward. "All right, but I reserve the right to demand a return trip at any moment." "Fair," he nodded. The car pulled away from the city, leaving behind skyscrapers and noise. The landscape shifted into open fields and long stretches of green. Nearly 2 hours later, they arrived at a quiet old farmhouse. Not flashy, but peaceful, grounded. "Where are we?" she asked. "A place my mom used to bring me," Nathan said. "It's mine now, but I rarely come back." Emma stepped out, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of grass, damp earth, and something honest. He led her past a white fence toward the stables. A sleek black horse watched them with calm, intelligent eyes. "You ride?" she asked, surprised. "Used to, when things were simpler." He reached out, stroking the horse's neck gently, and something in his face softened. Emma watched him. A different Nathan. No tailored suit, no sharp arrogance. Just a man, remembering what made him feel grounded. "Want to try?" he asked suddenly. She let out a laugh. "Are you serious? I haven't ridden anything larger than a bicycle." "I'll guide you." Against her better judgment, she agreed. And in the moments that followed, with the horse's steady breath, his calm voice instructing her, Emma felt something shift inside her. Not because he was Nathaniel Blake, but because he wasn't pretending to be anyone else. As the sun dipped behind the trees, they sat on the wooden porch, 2 cups of hot tea between them, watching the sky fade into dusk. "I don't bring people here," Nathan said, voice low. "So why me?" He looked at her. "Because you're not like anyone I've ever met." Dusk settled over the fields, painting the sky in deep shades of violet. Emma and Nathan sat on the porch in silence, wrapped in a kind of quiet closeness that felt too rare, too fragile. A part of her wished this moment could last forever. Then his phone rang. Nathan glanced at the screen, and in an instant, everything changed. "I need to take this," he said, voice lower now. Emma nodded, but a strange tightness formed in her chest. He stepped away, just far enough to keep his distance, but the tension in his voice carried through the air. "I said I'd handle it. No, that's not an option. If they back out, the deal falls apart." Gone was the man who'd smiled as she rode a horse for the first time. In his place stood the one the world knew, the one who bore the weight of power and pressure. Emma watched him, and for the first time she saw the conflict in him, torn between duty and the desire to be something more, between the world that demanded everything and this quiet corner where he could just be a man. When he returned, the softness in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a tension he couldn't hide. "I have to go," Nathan said, but the words seemed to hurt him more than they hurt her. His eyes lingered on hers, full of things he didn't have time to say. And Emma, for the first time, didn't know if he'd come back. "That's okay," Emma replied with a small smile, though her heart was already aching. "Go do what you have to do." He looked at her for a long time, like he wanted to say something, then didn't. "I'll call you," he murmured before turning away. And only after he left did Emma realize she was scared. Scared that this time she might lose something she hadn't even known she wanted. Emma had stayed at the countryside house after Nathan left. He'd had to go abruptly. One urgent call had turned him from the man smiling on the porch into the CEO with the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I'll have someone drive you home," he said before disappearing. And he did. A polite driver took her back to the city. But the ride wasn't like before. Quiet, tense, the last look in Nathan's eyes, like he'd wanted to say something but ran out of time, stayed with her for days. 3 of them, to be exact. No calls, no texts, just silence growing louder with each hour. Then, on Tuesday night, her doorbell rang. Emma opened the door, and for a second, she couldn't move. Nathan stood there, not in a tailored suit, just a dark sweater, his face pale, shadows beneath his eyes, like the last few days had been as stormy for him as they were for her. "I haven't slept in 3 nights, he said instead of hello. Emma stayed silent, letting the weight of that confession hang between them. "You didn't deserve that silence," he added, voice low. "But I was scared. Of everything falling apart, of us becoming real. For leaving you there, then vanishing." She didn't speak, just looked at him, waiting for something real. "The deal. It almost fell apart," Nathan said. "Everything was chaos, but the one thing I couldn't stand was the thought of you thinking I left without caring." "I get it. Work comes first," she replied calmly. "But I'm not someone who waits in silence." He stepped closer, slowly, like unsure she'd let him. "I don't want you to wait, not because you think I don't care." "Then what do you want, Nathan?" "I want you to stay," he said. "With me. For quiet moments like at the ranch. And the crazy ones like this." Emma inhaled, every wall she'd built inside her cracking. She reached up, touched his cheek, her voice softer. "I'm still here." He looked at her, like he couldn't believe it, then pulled her into a tight, silent embrace. No more running, just choosing each other. After that night, nothing was quite the same, but in the best way possible. Nathan wasn't just the man who called her every night or sent sweet texts when she least expected. He was the man who dropped by her office with coffee, who invited her to glittering events, then leaned down to whisper private jokes that made the entire crowd fade away. He didn't keep her separate from his world. He brought her into it, like she belonged. And Emma, though cautious, didn't retreat. She told him about her childhood, not glamorous, not easy, about working 2 jobs to pay for school, about the novel she'd always wanted to write but never dared to start. Nathan didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And sometimes that was the greatest gift of all. Of course they argued. Nathan was used to control. Emma hated being managed. Sometimes they misunderstood each other. There were moments she wanted to walk away. But he always came back. Gently, never demanding. And she always stayed, not because of promises, but because every time he chose to return, he chose her. Slowly, little things began to shift. A dress shirt forgotten on the back of a chair. A book with his bookmark tucked in. A second toothbrush in the bathroom. No one said it out loud, but both of them knew. They were building something that mattered. Not perfect, but real. That night, they stood on the balcony of Nathan's penthouse, the city sparkling below like a sea of stars. A breeze moved through the air, carrying with it the quiet hum of midnight. Emma leaned against the railing, a glass of wine in hand, her gaze distant, but her thoughts very near, focused on the man beside her. Nathan didn't speak for a while. He simply watched her, eyes thoughtful, like he was weighing something important. "Do you like it here?" he asked quietly. She turned toward him, nodding. "It's quieter than I expected." He smiled. Then, gently, as if not to shatter the moment, "I want you to stay." Emma blinked. "You mean tonight?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I mean move in, live here, with me." Silence settled between them, the kind that stretches only when something real is at stake. Her heart picked up speed. She'd imagined this might come, but not so soon, not when everything still felt so new, so tender. "I know this wasn't in your plan," Nathan continued. "I know you need time. But I also know one thing. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I don't want distance between us anymore." Emma met his eyes and saw it. The certainty, not a flashy promise, but a decision. An invitation into his life. Real, irrevocable. She set her wine down, stepped closer, and placed her hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong beneath the fabric. "Okay," she said, soft but certain. He exhaled, as though releasing something he'd been holding far too long, and when he kissed her, Emma knew. She wasn't hesitating anymore.